time and space. Everywhere and anywhere, every star that ever was. Where do you want to start?
We've escaped from Kerquillian, and we've all had to change our trousers because he was so very scary. Now it's time to topple off a cliff and go housebreaking. I'm Iain.
And I'm Mark, and welcome to All of Time and Space, or as all the cool kids are calling it, Aotas!
Aotas!
So let's get up to speed. The TARDIS crew members have taken a break from their adventures and are enjoying a well-deserved rest in a luxury villa on the outskirts of Imperial Rome. But in the gory grandeur that is Rome, things don't stay quiet for long. If the time travellers can save themselves from being sold as slaves, assassinated by classical hitmen, poisoned by the evil Locusta, thrown to the lions, maimed in the arena and drowned in a shipwreck, they still have to face the diabolical might of the mad Emperor Nero. As if that isn't enough, they also discover that although Rome wasn't built in a day, it was burnt down in considerably less time. And we'll be back after this.
You know what this is, child, don't you?
Plans?
Yes. Caesar Nero made it. For rebuilding Rome. Let me see, where are we now? 64 A.D. July. Yes, of course. He sets fire to Rome.
I know about that, Doctor.
Yes, he must. I expect his plan will be ready at any time now. Maximus. Must you hiss my name from all corners?
I'm sorry, but I have news.
Yes?
Nero has arranged for you to play in the arena.
Oh, has he now? Well, I must have misjudged the fellow.
And as you play, the lions will be released.
Oh, that will be charming.
Well, obviously you must leave here before this concert.
Oh, obviously.
So if you still intend to carry on with your plan, today is your last chance to kill Nero.
Yes. Kill Nero? I beg your pardon?
Maximus, when you first sent word from Corinth of your intention to murder the Caesar Nero, I informed your allies in the court.
Oh, yes, you did you? Yes.
And then, when the assassins left here to waylay you on your journey, naturally I thought that was the end.
Yes, but I arrived here.
Yes, Maximus, you arrived here.
And the centurion who was killed by my allies was the man that knew all about my plans, and Nero didn't.
Yes, we all know that, but my main concern now, Maximus, is that you should act on what I say.
I shall certainly act on what you say, immediately.
Good. And the lions will go hungry after all, eh?
Yes. Well, that settles that little bit of intrigue. I'm a would-be murderer, am I? Well, we must be going, child. I want to leave here as soon as it's dark.
Oh, but Doctor...
Now, there'll be no arguments. You will do as I say.
Maximus, my dear friend.
Oh, my dear Caesar Nero.
I have a surprise for you. Guess what it is?
Well, now, let me think. You want me to play in the arena?
You guessed.
Well, it's no problem at all. After all, you want to do your very best for your fellow artists. Well, why not the arena?
Yes, of course. That is exactly right.
Yes, well, I promise you, I shall try to make it a roaring success.
You'll have to play something special, you know.
Oh, yes, of course, yes. Something serious, yes. Something that they can really get their teeth into.
No, you can't. I've told no one.
Caesar Nero, I've always wanted to put on a good show, to give a great performance. But after all, who knows? If I go down well, I might even make it my farewell performance. You see, I've always wanted to be considered as an artist of some taste. Generally regarded as, palatable. But I must be boring you. Oh, I must. Surely you have so many other important things to attend to without standing here, chewing over the facts with me. Good gracious, there's something burning. My plans, my drawings for the new Rome! You fool, you idiot! A lifetime's work! I'll have you both killed over and over again! Guards! Guards! Fool! Idiot! Traitor! Pig! I was taken into the arena on an island with water all round, and in the water there will be alligators, and the water level will be raised, and the alligators will get you! Fool! Traitor! Brilliant! You are a genius, a genius! I will make you rich, rich! So the Senate wouldn't pass my plans, wouldn't let me build my new Rome. But if the old one is burnt, if it goes up in flames, they will have no choice. Rome will be rebuilt to my design. Brilliant, brilliant! Well, there you are, Ulysses. You heard what Nero said. Brilliant, brilliant. Let us go, will you? Otherwise you'll be getting some of that alligator treatment. Mm-hmm. Go on your way. About your business. Go along. We'd better be going, child, and I want to leave here as soon as it's dark.
I didn't think that was going to work.
Wasn't going to work? What next? I never had any doubt in my mind, my dear.
And I'm so pleased to say we're joined today by one of my podcasting heroes. It's none other than Mr. Erik Stadnik.
Oh, God, that is far too much pressure. And you know what they say, never meet your heroes. It's a bad idea.
Well, I've met you lots of times, and in person, and you're a lovely man.
Yes.
Yes, you're to blame. Well, one of the few people to blame, you and the other Erik, Mr. Escamilla, who's been on a previous episode. You both influenced me into thinking I could have a go at this myself, so it's all your fault.
Okay, I'll accept that. That's fine.
Okay. I'm afraid it's time to subject you to the mind probe.
No, not the mind probe.
No, not the mind probe.
Oh, what a marvellous delivery there.
What
Masterful.
a pro. Yes.
So, Erik, answer my mind probe correctly, and you will be returned to your customary time and place. But get it wrong, and Castellan Cockram here will toss you into the time lash with great pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Are you ready for several hastily written and ill-conceived questions?
Sure.
Then let me begin. Question 1. True or false? The BBC's test audience from 1964 found the story The Romans to be suitable only for morons.
True.
That is true. Question 2.
That's good.
He's off to a flyer. Oh, this one will get him though. Question 2. The Times described the story as flawless.
I'm going to say false.
It was true. It was also.
Oh.
It's got praise at both ends of a very terrible spectrum. Question 3. What is the popular and possibly true etymological origin of the name Rome?
Rome is named after the co-founder Romulus, who, with his twin brother Remus, founded the city of Rome.
I think weren't they kidnapped in the twin dilemma? We're on a tangent. I'm sorry. I've gone wrong.
Yes, they gave those poor twins who couldn't say the letter R.
Yes.
The names Romulus and Remus.
They had one job. That is the answer I have written down here. It is named after Romulus. Question 4. It's another true or false. Nero was murdered on the 9th of June, AD 68.
That sounds about right, so I'm going to say true.
It was false. Nero actually committed suicide on the 9th of June.
Of course he
68.
committed suicide. And he said, what an artist the world loses in me.
That's pretty much what he would have said based on the evidence of the Romans. Yeah. Final question. Question 5. Rome wasn't built in a day, but name something you could build in a day.
A lasting relationship.
Could you in just one day?
Have you ever seen the Before movies, like Before Sunrise, Before Midnight?
Oh yeah, no, yeah, okay, I'll give you that. So let me just top these up. That's And
you forget, as I said earlier, I have met Erik in the flesh, and I can well believe that.
Okay, well then that's fine. I'm going to say, on balance, all things being equal, that you have passed the mind probe, and at the end of tonight's podcast, you will be returned to your customary time and place.
Thank you. That's very gracious of you both.
I hate it when they get away.
I know. Maybe next time. So, Erik, I thought it would be fun to get you along to cover the Romans because you are a bit of a scholar and you know your stuff, and you are a bit of a Doctor Who fan as well.
Yes, a bit of one. I will admit, I am kicking myself internally for missing the trick word in the Nero question, which was murdered. Of course, Nero committed suicide. He wasn't murdered. But yeah, no, I enjoy Roman history, and I have studied it in a amateurish way. The same way I enjoy Doctor Who in a very amateurish way.
So, seeing as you're the expert, because let's be honest, Iain and I just don't have a clue about history at all, how accurate do you feel the depiction of Rome is? I mean, obviously it's a bit of a farce, so, it's not going to be super accurate, but do you think they did a pretty good job of capturing the essence of Rome?
I mean, no, but but I think they did. I think they captured the essence of the public imagination of Rome, which is probably more important for a television program.
Yeah,
it's one of those things like if you actually depict Roman life the way it would have been lived in many ways, I think people would probably be bothered by it or wouldn't recognize it, and so the changes they made that kind of broke history by and large were things to make it more familiar to the viewing public at home. Like, it's weird to think that Nero died quite young, and so in our mind Nero is kind of a lecherous middle-aged man. But he actually died at like 25 or something like that, maybe a little bit later, but he was quite young. And so it would be, I think, it would be very strange to have Nero in the story be, a 22-year-old guy. It would have a very different feeling. And so you make changes for the benefit of the story, for the benefit of the audience, to make it more familiar. I think it's all acceptable.
Yeah. This is Dennis Spooner's second entry into the pantheon of Doctor Who. So we reviewed the Reign of Terror for last season, and I hadn't seen it for quite a while, and I was quite surprised. I expected a bit more humour in there, because that's what I tend to associate Dennis Spooner with. But I think this is very much, watching this story, this is very much more what I was expecting. Do you approve of the kind of the farcical element that he's introduced into this story?
Oh, completely. I think Spooner's at his best when he's doing this sort of comedic touch that he does here. And it's really quite lovely. Hartnell is fantastic at playing the comedic elements, and this is such a great story for him to shine in that way. And I'm someone who sort of really appreciates the sort of idea of the TARDIS as a genre machine, and why shouldn't one of the genres be comedy? Like, yeah, sometimes the Doctor should land someplace and it's just all funny. That's just good. I like that.
When was the first time you had seen this story? Would this have been on American TV or on DVD?
Oh, heavens,
video,
no, on DVD. The sort of, the few scattered memories I have of watching Doctor Who on PBS when I was very young with my parents are all of sort of Tom Baker, because that was so prevalent. And so the Romans I wouldn't have seen until it was released on DVD, which was, I guess, about midway through the DVD run, maybe a little bit towards the end. By the time it was coming out, I knew to be excited for it, because I knew that I was going to enjoy it, and sure enough, I did.
And what about yourself, Ian?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
What was your first experience of the Romans?
Oh, I watched it this evening.
Well done. That's a standard response.
I remember seeing the paperback on the shelves in Smith's 35 years ago. But it wasn't one that I read, so I knew nothing about the story coming into it. And my impression is therefore fresh as a daisy.
And do you want to share with us your initial thoughts of your experience of watching the Romans?
I mean, do you want me to?
It's kind of the point of the show, but yeah.
It's suddenly here we are, episode 10 or whatever it is, and suddenly there's a point to the show. No one tells me anything.
Don't worry, we'll revert back to type again after this.
So I was kind of underwhelmed, and I was going to be coming into the show kind of the bad cop to your good cop, Mark. But now I'm thinking about it in a more considered way, largely because I'm listening to a sensible, intelligent grown-up talking about it. That's Eric, by the way, not you.
I managed to work that out for myself.
And I think I can appreciate it on that level, in terms of it being the first kind of, really intentional and deliberate, sustained comedy story. And obviously, historically, whilst it's not what you'd call totally accurate, it's not in any way wildly inaccurate, I would say. It takes a lot of the tropes that we know were germane to that era, and it does what it does with them. I think if I'd seen this when I was a child, I would have absolutely hated it. But watching it now through the short-sighted eyes of a middle-aged man, it was fine.
And Eric, what do you think of this TARDIS crew?
This is actually possibly my favorite TARDIS configuration. I have a lot of potential favorites, but this is a strong contender. I don't think Barbara and Iain have ever in the history of the show been matched, partly because of their sort of primal roles in establishing what the companions do. Also the dynamic they have together. They're not a couple officially, but they're a couple. Come on. And that sort of
They certainly are in this story.
They certainly are in this story, which is
You're definitely getting that vibe, aren't you?
And I think Vicky is the best version of the sort of god or granddaughter type that they have with the first Doctor. She is far and away for me the best iteration of that character. Much better than Susan. Not that Susan's bad, but Vicky's just much more fun. And this is such a great, because she debuted in the previous story in The Rescue, but here she's fully a companion to the point where she's like dragging the Doctor. Like, we're near Rome. Can we please just go to Rome? Like, let's just go. And she wants to have adventures. She wants to go do stuff. It's like, yes, it's sort of, you begin to see in that Vicky the sort of first idea of the companion as the person who's excited to be going on these journeys.
I think we'd said in a previous episode that poor Carol Ann Ford, I don't think it was really her fault. It was just the material she was given. I think they really had a chance to really look back at what they'd done with that character and rework it and just make it that bit better when they introduced Vicky.
Well, it's astonishing on a writing level that they wrote Susan so consistently, but so consistently unperformable. And the very first chance they had to do a course correct was Vicky, and they got it absolutely perfectly right. Thus far, this is obviously the second story we've seen her in, but introduced brilliantly. And as you say, she's a really engaging, fun companion in this who actually wants to poke around and get involved and see what's going on. And I don't know what the ratio is we've had in terms of companions who are pro adventure and pro going back to Heathrow Airport. Thank you very much. But you know, it's really refreshing, and it's not often in a show that's 60 years old that you stumble across a little corner of it that you find refreshing. So you know, I am in Team Vicky.
Yeah, she's great. She's just really plucky, and she's got a lot of spirit, and she's just a really super likable character.
Mm-hmm.
She really does hit the ground running. I think she's very worthy of Eric's praise.
I did notice this was probably the most Billy Fluff episode I've seen so far. I think it was episode 2. There was one scene where he got about 3 sentences and they all came out completely cluck trousers, shall we say. Probably,
yeah, unfortunately that's only going to get worse.
Yeah, I think probably, and actually Barbara had one as well. No, Barbara's was better. There was a pause in episode 4 where she could have been omitting a rude word. She was saying something like, "Oh, we were only in the Colosseum," and there could have been a bloody or a stronger swear word. I don't know, but I think it kind of, the impression it gives is that on this occasion, at least, the cast were just, you know, really invested in this one and actually having a lot of fun. And I think that the strength of that came through, so that even when they were making the tiniest little cock up or choke on a word or whatever, it didn't faze them, it didn't stop them. They were in it. They were really having a good time making this.
I also feel this story plays to the strengths of the format of the sort of 25-minute episode setup, because, I mean, it's only a 4-part story, so it's relatively short by a lot of the 60 standards, but I think there's enough time for that story to breathe. So it opens with them in sort of holiday mode, which is really nice. Mm-hmm. It's such a break from, you know, having to go from one drama to the next, and it's just good to see them just relaxing and just having a bit of time out.
Yeah, especially because at the end of the rescue, you know, you see the little TARDIS model land on the side of a cliff, and then it falls off the cliff.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God. And the Red Norman just begins as like, yeah, that happened like a month ago. Everything's fine. They're getting drunk in a villa. It's just like, okay, sure, let's do this. And you're exactly right. It's they're in holiday mode, especially Barbara and Iain. They're exclusively in holiday mode. Vicky's like in kid going on holiday mode. She's like, can we go? Are we leaving? Are we going to be there yet? That sort of thing. With the Doctor trying not to. This is actually maybe the first time we see the Doctor trying not to get involved in history, and then finding himself involved in history anyway, and his sort of sheer delight at the idea that he caused the Great Fire of Rome is something I really treasure about this story. It's one of those stories that if you take a step back or two, it's very, very dark in the things it makes you laugh about, but it still does it. And it's a touch that Dennis Spooner, I think, really has to make darker material seem frivolous and kind of cool.
I think it shows how far the character of the Doctor's come as well, just in the space of, you know, we're just at the beginning part of season 2, and he's already developed into a much rounder character. He's kind of lost some of those sharper edges, and he can still be grumpy from time to time, but I think you get a much more rounded character, and it really gives Hartnell the chance to show off his comedic side as well, which is a revelation. The first time I saw this, I was really impressed. It was genuinely funny.
Yeah, no, it really is. I think some of the stuff that was probably quote unquote funny at the time, like the Nero chasing Barbara up and down the hallway, may not necessarily work as well today. But everything with the Doctor, like when he fights the mute, even though Billy definitely has some flubs in there, is funny, and him dealing with Nero and him playing quote unquote playing his lyre, or his, and you know, and everyone pretending
the Emperor's new clothes.
Exactly, pulling the Emperor's new clothes, and Nero just saying he's not that good. It's really, really quite wonderful, and that all of the characters sort of find their groove in this very different sort of script than what they're used to doing. And I completely can imagine that it was a refreshing change of pace for them to do something just sort of, this is just a bit of fun. Let's just have some fun here.
So I thought it was interesting, and it's obviously because no one at the BBC has kind of worked out who the Doctor is yet, or what skills he might have. But I think if this story was being made now and he had that kind of pressure on him to play the lute, he'd just take himself away for 3 hours and learn to be really good at playing the lute, or the harp, or whatever it was. But in this story, he spends...
The lyre.
The lyre, yes.
Lyre,
sorry,
yes.
I'm so sorry. I'm also tired in my defence, and blonde. So I think in this one he spends about as much time thinking of the cunning ruse of playing the Emperor's New Clothes trick as he would have done nowadays, just learning how to play it. And I don't know, I think it's possibly more cunning and more funny what he did come up with to get out of being embarrassed. But I would have loved to have heard him really badly playing something. I think that would have really pulled the rug out from under that character.
He is much more, like the first Doctor is not. He's very doctory, obviously, but he's not doctory in the sense of I have a respiratory bypass system.
Precisely.
I have, Venusian Aikido.
Or I walk in eternity.
I walk in eternity. Yeah, none of that, and to the point where it feels strange. Like, obviously, the same character. I accept all Doctors as canon, but it feels weird to sort of lump him in with them, because he does have a very, they weren't conceiving of the character that way. They weren't writing him that way. And exactly as you say, he's in this situation where he has to, he's been mistaken for this guy. And the Doctor, instead of using any of that time to learn how to play his instrument, and he had plenty of notice.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of doing anything like that, he's just like, oh, I'll figure something out. I'm smart. And sure enough, he does.
I love how they split up all the characters as well, so they all kind of go off on their separate, divergent storylines, and then they keep on crossing over each other, but just missing each other just by that fraction of a second, and it all kind of comes together at the end.
I think it was really sophisticated the way they did it this time as well, because normally they'd sort of keep bumping into each other throughout the story and coming together in groups of 2 and 3 and blah blah. But this time they were all just held, perfectly far apart, even when Barbara's at one end of the corridor and the Doctor's, 12 feet away behind a curtain or whatever. It was just really skillfully done. And I don't know what else Dennis Spooner wrote, but you get the feeling he's obviously a bit of a dab hand at this kind of balanced and structured farcical setup.
He had done other drama-y stuff. I don't know that he'd written a ton of comedy before he came to Doctor Who, but maybe. But
hadn't he done the Avengers before this?
It would have been around this time, maybe a little bit after.
Or around the same time, I guess.
And he had done some Jerry Anderson stuff, but he was he was just a sort of, jobbing writer, a lot of police procedurals. I'm sure he wrote Z-Cars or something, because everyone wrote Z-Cars, I think. But he was brought in, and he was script editor at this time, and he also wrote this story, and he brought this sort of deftness of tone to all of his stories, even the ones that sort of have more sci-fi elements, like the Time Middler. It's still very funny and a lot of jokey. I think he just thinks, why shouldn't this show be funny? This should be a funny show. It's a funny idea. Let's have a funny show.
It's a funny premise. Yeah, let's have some fun with it. I mean, it is, because season 2, there's a lot of very earnest stories and very dramatic moments, and it's all very the peril. So yes, it is, and it must have been great for the audience as well to have a little kind of lacuna of as we say, sort of slightly more relaxed and fun stuff to break up the drama. But again, I still think that as a kid you'd have been sort of banging your head on the settee waiting for this one to be over.
I can imagine the cast, when they first read the script, would have been absolutely desperate to get on and make this one, because it is something that's a bit of a break from the norm.
Oh, absolutely. It would have been the first time they'd had something like this across their desk, and it would have been the first kind of real, gear change or shake up of what they did week in, week out, and it must have been such a holiday for them to do something different, and that I feel is reflected in everyone's performance.
Iain is not the biggest fan of Ian Chesterton, Eric. What did you make of him in this story?
I think it's quite funny that they all kind of land in broad pastiches or parodies of like Roman movies. The Doctor gets sort of like the palace intrigue Roman movie, right? Where you have the Empress scheming and poisoner and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. Barbara gets the sort of like Carry On Rome, it feels like, almost, where she's loaded a slave and she's chased around. And then poor Iain is like in the Gladiator movie.
Yep.
And his entire experience, after having spent weeks just like having intimate times with Barbara, one assumes, and plenty of wine, and growing his hair differently, he then gets kidnapped and pressed into being a slave and a galley oarsman and a gladiator. And no one believes him almost at the end. It's like he has a really terrible experience of it all, and survives it by some miracle. But the joke of it is like that he just doesn't get to have any fun. His life is just awful, awful. And I almost have the sense that partly it was to sort of have a little bit of the sort of actiony stuff to maybe keep some of the kids involved, because some of the kids like seeing the sword fights and stuff, but also to sort of have this reminder that Roman life was awful for many people who were slaves and gladiators, and that it wasn't just people lounging about in togas eating grapes. It was brutal and violent and terrible. And Iain is the one who kind of gets to deal with all of that.
I would imagine Iain probably thinks he had it coming anyway, because he's very pleased with himself when he's wandering around in his Roman outfit, isn't he?
Well, I gotta say...
What do you think, Iain?
I gotta say, you get rid of that side parting, you mess his hair up, you take him out of that bloody suit and tie, and... stone me if this wasn't the most enjoyable performance I've sine from our friend Mr. Chesterton. He was convincing. Him the rowing the galley, that was the galleon rather, that was wonderful. It was probably fairly upsetting if you were really there and really a slave, but he conveyed that. He was almost naturalistic when he had to go and do the fighting, and he was worried about lions. But the most wonderful thing, I think, was just the scenes with him and Barbara at the beginning and the end, when they are just relaxing and doing nothing and having a bit of fun and acting like a couple.
It feels really natural, doesn't it?
And it was so natural, and it was so lovely. For 4 weeks.
I love that bit of business when he tells her to go and get something from the fridge.
Yeah. It's for 4 weeks he didn't have to strut around acting as the public information officer or the BBC's education czar and sort of subtly start wanging on about stalactites or whatever. And he was just there like the rest of them, just to be in the story with no ulterior motive from a production or from a writing angle. And I think this to date is his finest hour for me.
Made up.
Yeah, that's really nice. It's a great story for all the regulars, which is one of the reasons why I love it so much. Is so often in the sort of crowded TARDIS eras, you have stories that just sort of abandon one or the other characters, and they all really get lovely stuff to do in this story. And nothing makes me happier than seeing Iain be a bit of a doof. Like when he's walking around going, "Oh, tempora, oh, mores," with his schoolboy Latin. It's just incredible. And Barbara sort of rolling her eyes at him. It's incredibly charming. And you're right. He doesn't have that sort of weight put on him in this story that he does in so many stories, where he has to be like the teacher. He has to be like the voice of reason or the authority. Yeah. Here, he's just a guy, and it's much more fun that way.
Yeah, exactly. without wanting any spoilers, I don't know if this is perhaps the best story for this iteration of the TARDIS crew, or if there's even better to come, but it feels like if you could take one Hartnell era story to a desert island, I don't know, maybe this could be the one.
It's not a bad choice. It's one of my favorites from the entire era, and certainly if I am allowed more than one and I can pick one serious and one funny, this is the funny, probably. There are a couple other really good ones, but I think for this TARDIS configuration before Barbara and Ian leave, I think this is definitely my favorite story.
I know at the time the general feedback from the viewing audience was that they didn't really like the historical stories, and they much preferred the exciting spacey stories with aliens and stuff. But I think this goes a long way to keep the interest by having that comedy element to it, and I think that keeps it fresh.
Yeah, and it had really huge viewing figures, if I remember at the time, partly because it was carryover from a few weeks before when they had Dalek Invasion of Earth. But even so, they'd had the rescue in between, and now they're onto a whole other set of stories, and people were still tuning in droves. And I think largely enjoying what they're watching, except for the prigs at the BBC Viewers Council who are like, "Ooh, it's not accurate to
God, how harsh
children," and it's utter nonsense.
Suitable for morons.
Yeah, I mean this is before the show had settled down to become, what Barry Letts and Terrence Dicks did to the show and made it the weekly sci-fi adventure show. And it's such an exciting thing to see the programme do Dalek Invasion of Earth and then tread water a little bit with the rescue, but then launch into something like this, which is not a science fiction drama aimed at a family audience. It's I still maintain this does skew more towards the adults, and it's a comedy, and it's a very low stakes historical. And at the time, watching these as they were broadcast, this show was so much more than what it is now. It's very, very, very limited in a genre and a format now. But I think this is a really good example of the sheer scope of the things that the show was capable of before they nailed down the limiting underpinnings of that format.
Eric, one of your many podcasts has been the Writer's Room.
Yes. And
do you feel that they could get away with doing a purely historical story in the modern show, or are we too far gone past that now? Do we have to have aliens or some kind of extra element in there?
I think it's just the show can do whatever it wants. I mean, a show that is willing to do a story like Heaven Sent can clearly do whatever the hell it wants.
Yeah.
I just don't think there's an appetite. I'm not even saying from the viewers. I don't think there's actually much appetite from the writers to do something purely historical. I think the closest we might ever get again would be something like Demons of the Punjab, which we had in Series 11, which had aliens, but they were completely inconsequential aliens, it turns out.
Yeah.
And things like that, I think we might get again in the future. Rosa, I think, may as well have been a pure historical, just remove the evil racist from outer space. That part didn't quite work for me.
No.
Yeah, I think that shows that you can do it, but fundamentally, I do think people think of Doctor Who as a science fiction or a science fantasy show, and it's really difficult dealing with the history question, which RTD spent pages and pages sort of gnashing his teeth over. Can the Doctor interfere in history? And it's sort of
so then we had the fixed points in time.
Yes, all of the stuff about fixed points in time, and then Moffat's like, well, you can rewrite some things, but not other. It gets very convoluted.
Yeah, it gets messy.
Yeah, up its own butt, as it were. And whereas Spooner here is just laughing about that idea. And his next story then is The Time Meddler, which is actively about having fun with changing history. So I think Spooner has just a very different approach to what you can do with history in a show like this, that for whatever reason, I think the modern show just can't quite approach things in that same sort of way. And I think that does sort of just mean you're always going to at least have some little alien poking its head around the corner, no matter what you do.
I think part of it might be that it's just so much more of a risk nowadays because, no one wants to be the showrunner that commissions the story that leads to a collapse in ratings that takes the show off the air for another 15 years. And, nobody wants to write an episode that doesn't do what the show has now done week in, week out for, 2015 years. So maybe things are just so much more set in stone now that there isn't the will in anyone involved to even try. Whereas before they worked out what format the show was going to work in, there was just this much more lively approach to it. I started that sentence quite confident of what I was saying, and as it went on, it just sort of fell apart in my mind. So my delivery there might have been a little rubbish, and I can only apologise to everyone.
David Tennant in Blink saying, "I kind of got away from me."
It did.
It is, but I think you're exactly right. Though there's a certain amount of, I think, fear and trepidation about doing new and or different things. Which is why, we've had 2 holiday specials with Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor, and they both had Daleks in them. There are the things the show goes back to again and again. Literally the story Time Mother comes just after the second ever Dalek story, like the first time they've ever revisited something. And they're kind of just developing that sort of sense. Oh, we can do more than one story with a monster or an alien or something. But as you're saying, exactly, it's the show hadn't settled on a quote unquote format yet. They still didn't know exactly how long episode story lengths change. You had 4-parters, 2-parters, 6-parters, 8-parters, 12-parters. All kind of mixed in randomly, it seems at times, almost like with not a lot of clear sense of, why it's being done that way. And the show just gets more and more formulaic as it goes on. And not bad. I think there's a pretty wide range of formulas.
Yeah.
But it's really noticeable in the modern era when the new formulas kind of get set and they kind of adapt the old formulas largely. And then you do have the episodes that kind of break those formulas, but they're pretty few and far between.
That's why they stand out so much.
And that's why they stand out so much. Things like Heaven Sent or Midnight is another example. I was thinking of a show that kind of breaks the formula of Doctor Who. But here they were just doing what they wanted. And so everything was just sort of, well, why not? Why not just have the Doctor and his friends land in ancient Rome and just lark about for 4 weeks?
Quite a good parallel might be Love and Monsters as a more recent example of people just saying, let's toss out the rule book and just have a bit of fun. And you think how yes, obviously divisive that story was, but a lot of people do have strong memories and opinions of it. And I wonder if for a time the Romans was similarly thought of by the very nascent fandom of the of 1964, whether it was something they would hark back to and see as a kind of standout rule book changing story.
It is interesting that it became more common for the historicals to have funniness, and they were more comedic after this, because you had the Romans. And then Time Meddler, which is not a pure historical, it's the first sort of like a pseudo-historical with another Time Lord in there.
The Gunfighters.
The Gunfighters, which is a comedy. Even something like The Highlanders, which is the last pure historical until Black Orchid, is kind of meant to be funny a lot. They're not, they'll do still in the future things like The Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve, which is the exact opposite of a comedic historical. But, I think the sort of sense of Doctor Who can do historic period drama, and that being one of the things it dips into, I think that with the Romans, that idea starts to fade. And it starts to be whatever Doctor Who should be, it should be fun. Whatever else, it should be fun. And if it's not fun because they're aliens and monsters, it should be fun because there are jokes and people falling over.
What did we think of the guest cast for this one? I thought the guy that rescues Barbara, I thought he was really good.
Oh, you mean
the character name now.
Delos, I think, is the slave owner, the slave manager for the house? Yes. Mm-hmm. The surprise he's a secret Christian character.
Yeah.
That bit doesn't make any sense.
No, not lick of sense, but...
No. But I think he's fantastic. I think the guest cast is uniformly quite good. I think he's excellent. I think Derek Francis, I think, he's exactly what we imagine Nero to be. Like, he's definitely giving us, like, TV Nero, not accurate Nero, but it feels like Nero still. Like, petty and impetuous and childish, but tremendously dangerous because he's a child who knows he can have your head cut off at any moment. And because of that, there's just this really uneasiness about him. I like all the guest cast, really. I like him quite a bit.
Iain, any thoughts?
Now what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to reverse this lorry-like sentence into a very positive parking space, even though the lorry itself is full of negativity. They were. You
are allowed to not like things, It's fine. It's okay.
I'm forgetting them already. It's been 2 or 3 hours, and I'm forgetting them all because they were so good at representing and inhabiting those characters that they didn't strike any wrong notes. At the same time, they weren't brilliant enough to, really leap out. I mean, Nero was a kind of, Frankie Howard, Bernard Bresslaw, Carry On kind of insane figure. But I was disappointed because I'd got Nero confused with Caligula. And I've seen a film about Caligula, and I was really hoping that Helen Mirren was going to turn up in this, and there'd be all kinds of excitement with vegetables. But sadly, I had the wrong emperor in my mind, for which I can only apologise. I think the one that really didn't work for me. Who was the gentleman who rescued Iain and then had to fight him? Dildo or something.
Oh yeah. Delos?
Yeah. Now there was
Peter Diamond was the actor.
There was something in his performance that just didn't seem particularly. He just sounded a bit, London.
I think I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure he.
Don't tell me he's actually
first
Italian.
And foremost yeah. No, he was first and foremost a stuntman.
Right.
Who could turn his hand to acting as well. So a sort of precursor to Havoc and all that kind of stuff. So I think he was hired for his sort of swordplay skills, and
that would totally explain it because it was a very sort of not subtle. Subtle is the wrong word, but it was a very underplayed, matter of fact kind of character and kind of performance, which obviously makes total sense in the context of him being there to be good with a pokey sword and emit some lines of dialogue.
It takes a while, I feel, for the guest cast in Doctor Who to ever really properly get much to do that's very interesting.
Yes.
Like you have flashes here and there. I think Nero is like the spotlight role here, obviously. And then when Peter Butterworth plays the monk, that's sort of like a big he's like a proper character, but often they are just kind of people reciting dialogue on screen. It's like I always think about it as like you're watching a Shakespeare play and there's like 8 people at the court and you have like he's like one of those court guys. I know the king, and I know the king's enemies, I know the king's wife, and then there are like 5 other guys, and I don't know. They're just saying stuff, and I couldn't tell you apart any of them. And that's kind of, I think, what happens in a lot of sort of very, especially early 60s Doctor Who, is it's sort of like, well, the guest cast just kind of are there.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't think any of them were really outstandingly bad. I think they rounded it out quite nicely. I think it was. I don't know where I'm going with that.
But I think that's right. I think they do their jobs, and they do them serviceably. And I think there are occasional moments of charm from some of them, but it's not. None of them ever threatens to like become a new cast member.
Yeah,
like you're never
they're not going
like,
to steal
so
the show.
taken with them that you're like, oh, have them come back. It's like, oh, they're fine.
So this might be a slightly dull question, but do we have any favourite bits?
I mean, I think the one I always think about, because it's just such an odd moment, and it's one that's been talked about on many times on DVD commentaries and things, is the death of Tigellinus, where, you know, the doctor warns Nero that his wine has been poisoned, which, okay, interesting that the doctor is still trying to save Nero's life at this point. Which is a debatable moral decision. And you know, and so he doesn't drink the wine, and then he has Tigellinus drink the wine, and Tigellinus dies. It just dies right there. It's like, huh? So he was right. And it is murder on screen for a joke, and I find that really fascinating. I think it's Rob Sherman said it's the first ever comedy death in Doctor Who, and it is. It is a striking thing to watch. It's also played quite well, I think. Like Tigellinus takes a sip and then he doesn't like gurn. He just sort of like dies.
Yeah. And it's a very Carry-On moment. I don't know if you're au fait with the Carry-On films, Eric, or if you've
I've
managed
only
to
seen
escape
clips.
seeing them.
They're not a thing in America, but I'm aware of the concept. And yeah, it is very sort of that sort of farcical sort of nonsense, and I just love it because it is one of those moments where this should be horrifying, but because it's Doctor Who, we're allowed to laugh at it, and I think that's actually quite clever.
Yeah. What about you, Iain?
Well, I do think that was a brilliant observation, actually. The first comedy death. My favourite bit is probably when Barbara smashes the vase over Ian's head. Because I've been watching this show for the last, 8, 9, 10 stories, itching to do that myself. And is it a coincidence that after she does that, he becomes a much more palatable character? I like to think that maybe she knocked something out of him.
She knocked some sense into him.
I thought the scenes
on
the galleon were very well realised. On a production visual level, I thought that was really good, and some of the imagery towards the climax with the fire of Rome, again, you can do a lot, and you can establish a lot with some canny direction and a few misleading shots and what have you, but Otherwise, I think my favourite bit was the last kind of 5 minutes in the villa again, where it was just Iain and Barbara just being lovely, just being fabulous.
No, I think that's my highlight. It's just all the scenes with those two. It's just a joy to watch. Great fun, very naturalistic, and just I think it's the culmination of that sort of we've mentioned it numerous times, and Matt Barber will be kicking himself he didn't get to do this episode because he's been banging on about literally the Chesterton Wright consummation, and I think this is the moment.
It definitely feels as I think it's, I forget what book it's in, maybe it's in the Discontinuity Guide. It's like, this is definitely post-coital. Like, there are some moments of them drinking wine. It's like, yeah, they just did it.
I mean, there must have been a reference in one of the New Adventures that explained the exact moment to the screenshot where they did it. It's not the sort of gap fandom would leave. I'm pretty sure it was maybe all-consuming fire or transit. I don't know. It's just he does. Mr. Barber did profess to know exactly when it was. Perhaps he was there himself. But, I think that you can't spend a month in that villa if you're Iain and Barbara without, at least having a go. just to see if there's any future in you as a couple, or if there's no chemistry or whatever. But, otherwise you've got grapes and a sofa, so that would have really dragged.
Yeah. I also I just wanted to sort of highlight some, because I do think Vicky gets to do some fun stuff. I like her with the poisoner. I like her kind of get mixed up in that and sort of that sort of side of things. But I also just think we should not let this episode go by without discussing the fact that this is, I think, the first time we see the Doctor shirtless.
Wow.
I think when he's in the steam bath with Nero and he's got the towel over his shoulders.
Okay.
You got topless old Hartnell there. Ooh. So I think...
A special moment for you there, Eric?
I mean, no, not really. It's not my type. But it is sort of one of those things that if it happened now, it would sort of be like, oh, the Doctor's not wearing a top. And it's like... They hadn't decided yet that he shouldn't. They hadn't decided yet that he should, that would be like a thing. And so why not just have the Doctor in his like steam bath gear talking to Nero? Sure. And there's no tattoo as far as I can tell to indicate that he's, an inmate of a Time Lord prison colony or anything.
So unless we have anything else to say about this story, shall we give it a rating out of 10? Eric, would you like to go first? What would you score this 1 out of 10?
I mean, is it actually like perfect? No. But is it one of the most charming, enjoyable, just fun stories from this era with this cast? And are they all on top form? Yes. So I'm going to rate this an X.
Excellent. I like your style there. Very good. I am gonna give this one a very healthy 9 out of 10. I really enjoy it. It's one I can go back to again and again. It's got rewatch value. Hartnell is superb. All those comic touches really shows what he can do. And you've got the whole business with Iain and Barbara, and it's just a great fun show. So yeah, I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. Iain, no pressure.
So it's either a V1 or a V11 for me. I think with my sort of intensely, innately childish outlook and need for spectacle and drama and excitement, it was really quite dull. But for all the serious, adult, sensible reasons we've discussed, it was charming, it was relaxed, and it was innovative. So yeah, I think I'm gonna have to give it a 7 or X11. V11. Christ, it's been so long since I've done Roman numerals. Oh, how embarrassing. V11.
Marvellous. Right, well, that's enough of what we think. Let's get some feedback from you guys.
I've got mail.
Our very good friend Andy Moore, who lives on Twitter as AMMoore67, replies... Apart from the sanitation, the medicine, education, wine, public order, irrigation, roads, the freshwater system and public health, what have the Romans ever done for us? Showed us you can do comedy in Doctor Who? And suggest Barbara and Iain have done it? Comedy and sex? Shut up. The Crinoid podcast have come back with... This is a successful mixture of comedy and drama. Hartnell has a whale of a time with the lighter stuff. William Russell ably handles the more heroic storyline. And Jackie Hill, he said Jackie. He's being very informal and cheeky here.
Very
Jackie
informal,
Hill is somewhere in between. The original assassin the Doctor impersonates is hilariously long in the tooth, though. And that is a very good point. He must have been about, 90, that guy? And finally from me, ham-fisted Batfender. Every time I read that out, I'm paranoid I'm going to get it wrong, but I've got away with it yet again. Says, I fell for this one way back on its UK Gold screening in the early 90s. Wonderfully witty script and nicely directed by Christopher Barry. Always a reliable hand at the helm. Don't. And the most memorable for myself anyway of the UK Gold trailers.
Excellent, thank you. And we've had a bit of audio feedback. from our friend Ben Schneider in Indiana. So let's have a listen to what he's got to say.
If you grew up being a fan of Masters of the Universe with characters such as He-Man, Beastman, and Merman, you might be disappointed by the content in Doctor Who and the Ro-Man. Yes. Gosh, that was a long walk for a stupid joke. Still, I really wish that I had hair so Barbara could comb it forward. Bliss.
Thank you, Ben. And I've got some more feedback here. We've heard from Jonathan. He says, it's a fun story with an impressively terrible target novelisation. It's an epistolary novel. So, it's a thumbs up on the novel for Jonathan there. Thank you. David Kitchen says, the wittiest script in the first 16 years of Doctor Who. Don't know if Eric will agree with that. Hartnell's acting and comic timing is amazing. Vicky goes from strength to strength. Yeah, not too many arguments there, David. Thank you. And we've heard from 42 to Doomsday. I think this is Mark writing. He says, the perfect length for a historical story and a lot of fun. At Dread Sinister, so that's Rob, his podcasting mate, is a big fan of the novelisation as well. And we've also heard from Ross Aitken from the Gallifrey's Most Wanted podcast. You need to check that one out. It's a good show. He says, it is a comedic masterpiece. I'm a fan of the historical. I also like that in the Hartnell era, they made some of them comedies. The four regulars each get their own story and they shine. William Russell gets the less interesting part by holding up the adventure storyline. I enjoy this story so much. Thank you, Ross. And lastly from me, we have Jeff Goddard, otherwise known as the City of Jeff on Twitter, who says, it's always Vicky I feel sorry for, after God knows how long stuck on Dido and then straight into a lengthy holiday eating honeyed ants' eggs. Still, at least she got to nearly poison Nero. The Romans is great fun and gives us our first look at Hartnell's great comedic timing. A romp, but a fun and entertaining romp. Thank you, Jeff. That's great. And thank you all for your feedback. We love to hear your thoughts on these stories as we cover them. So keep it coming. Thank you. So it just leaves us to thank Eric for being our guest. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. I love the Romans.
Well, we do too, it seems. Would you like to give a little plug to what you've got going on?
Sure. So I have a couple Doctor Who podcasts. One is called The Real McCoy. It's about all of, we've completed now all of the televised stories featuring Professor McCoy as the Seventh Doctor, and we're transitioning over to talking about some other materials featuring the Seventh Doctor. That is fun. And the other one that was Mark already mentioned earlier is called The Writer's Room. We covered all of classic Doctor Who, and then we did the television show The Outer Limits, and we did Sapphire and Steel. And in just a few weeks now, we're going to begin covering modern Doctor Who, at least the first 10 seasons of it.
Excellent.
So it'll be, it'll be interesting talking about the writing of new Doctor Who, which is something I have not really had the opportunity to do very much.
Excellent. Well, by the time this goes out, you'll probably have covered all 10 seasons by that point.
Can I just cheekily cut in and say that the Real McCoy podcast is one of the most enjoyable things I've ever listened to as a huge nerd when it comes to the Sylvester McCoy era. I love that so much.
Oh, thank you so much. That is wonderful to hear. It is in many ways truly a labor of love, partly because Adam and I are plagued by consistent audio issues and crazy things. And so it is always just a bit of a nightmare, but we really love doing it. And we both really love that era of the show and the sort of the changes it brought to the sort of greater Doctor Who conception of what the show could be. So it's been a lot of fun to do that show.
It is a great show, well worth checking out. Well, thank you very much again, Eric.
Thank you.
Maybe you'll come back and join us for another episode sometime.
Well, if this was for the wittiest story in the first 16 years, I have a suspicion I know what they think the next witty story is, and I disagree about that one, but maybe sometime between now and then.
Okay, that's a deal. If If you'd like to get in touch, you can email us at mailbagofrassilon@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter @TimeEndSpacePod, and you can also find us on Facebook. If you want to leave some audio feedback, there is a link in the show notes. You can use your phone or your computer and leave up to 60 seconds of feedback, or if you're listening via the Anchor website, you can click on the message button and leave your audio. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you to Momo Tempo for providing our theme music.